Good evening, everybody. I'm gonna let folks come in. And I see that our captions are coming up now, so thank you to our captioner, Kate Pettigrew, who is with us remotely. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the Executive Director of Keras Circle. Keras Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Keras Books and More, and Keras is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. Welcome to our folks watching at home and also to all of you who are here with us in this space. It is an important time here in Georgia, an important time in our political history in general. We are honored to be here in this space and this time with all of you. Tonight, we welcome author Becca Andrews in conversation with Jaleesa Jackson, who is the Interim Director of Access Reproductive Care Southeast, and Kwajalein Jackson, who is the Executive Director of the Feminist Women's Health Center, for a discussion of No Choice, the destruction of Roe v. Wade, and the fight to protect a fundamental American right. No Choice is an in-depth look at the legacy of Roe v. Wade and on-the-ground reporting from the front lines of the battle to protect the right to choose. Author Becca Andrews, Author Becca Andrews is an investigative journalist who writes about reproductive justice, religion, and inequality. Her work has appeared in Mother Jones, Wired, The New Republic, and Jezebel, among other publications. Tonight's event is co-sponsored by our friends at Edelweiss. Edelweiss is the book industry's platform to market, sell, discover, and order new titles. Through Ascend, Edelweiss promotes diversity, equity, and inclusion in the publishing and technology industries. This is done by investing in organizations that are already doing this work, providing access through internships and scholarships, and amplifying undersupported voices. They are the folks who are paying for our accessibility services tonight, including our interpreter, Nat, who is up front. This event is also co-hosted by Access Reproductive Care Southeast and the Feminist Women's Health Center. ARC Southeast is a reproductive justice organization based in Atlanta, Georgia, and funds abortion and builds power in the region. Feminist Women's Health Center is a reproductive health, rights, and justice organization. They provide direct services, including abortion care. They provide education, advocacy, and leadership development opportunities. So thank you to all of our co-hosts and co-sponsors and all of you for being with us tonight. If you have questions and are watching virtually, please put them in the chat and I'll gather and integrate them into the in-person Q&A at the end of the event. And of course, all of you are here with us in the room. Please know that you are welcome to ask questions towards the end once we get into this discussion. So honored to have you all with us, two of our favorite folks in Atlanta, and so glad to have Becca with us tonight. So I'm going to kick it over to y'all.
Thanks, Yara. Sounds fun. Hey, y'all. Good evening. I'm grateful to be here in dialogue with you both about abortion. We're having timely dialogues. This book was really timely. So yeah, welcome folks. And
yeah, and I'm also just say like what an honor this is for me. Like the work that you two do is incredible, and this whole thing is a little surreal to me. So thank you so much for being here.
sure, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be in Keras. Always just a joy to be in partnership with ARC Southeast and with Jaleesa in particular. So feeling really good about tonight. Yeah, and a little bit of history. Kwajalein and I have worked together. I'm a Feminist Women's Health Center alum. I was a Bully Fellow once upon a time and used to be the Director of Community Engagement. Also, we represent the Jackson Gang right here. So it's great. We introduced. I mean, I'm curious about where to start. An entry point. And that is where we kind of start when we talk about reproductive justice, oftentimes, like what brought people to this work, what's their entry point to reproductive justice. And so I'm curious for you, as moving through the text and you talk a little bit about your history and your understanding and of abortion access and the kind of trajectory and your evolution around your politics around the issue. So maybe we can start there and we can chime in after, but would love to hear a little bit more and to share with folks here who don't know about your entry point.
Yeah, that sounds great. And that's always the question that I first ask sources too, when I'm like getting to know them, so also very fair. Yeah, so I grew up very conservative, very evangelical in West Tennessee, in a very rural community, so abortion was one of those things where it was like, no one ever said the word abortion while I was growing up until the scene in the book where it comes up in Sunday school. It was sort of just this idea of it was taboo and like untouchable and sort of like this unspeakable evil in the way that it was kind of in my community. So fast forward a little bit to Sunday school, I think it was a substitute lesson. I think this guy like didn't actually have anything planned, and then like it was like, let's talk about abortion. And he definitely didn't mean for things to go the way that they did with me, but so he starts out class by asking, how do y'all feel about abortion? And, the answer was like, it's wrong, it's sinful, it's evil. And then he sort of starts to press where he's like, what about in cases of incest or in cases of rape? And I think his point was to show us that real life is so much more complicated than it seems in a sanctuary when you're young. And it's like, oh, the world is very like, there's good and evil and that's it. But instead, like what happened with me is and growing up, I was always the kid that was like, I want to have the right answers to everything. I want an A in church. I want an A in Sunday school. What do I have to get my A? So yeah, like I said the right things, but certainly internally, it was kind of like, wait a second, and I also, actually, I haven't talked about this before, but I also was always kind of bothered by the story of the Virgin Mary and the Immaculate Conception, because it was just like, there's this woman and she did not get pregnant. Suddenly she's pregnant. Like, this was very upsetting to me as a kid, but it wasn't something that like I could talk about because we were supposed to just be in awe of this thing that didn't make any sense. Anyway, but yeah, so that's kind of how I first started thinking about it. And then, the thing happened that always happens where I left my small town and I went to a really big state school. I went to Middle Tennessee State in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and just like meeting so many different people from so many different backgrounds just kind of started to blow that religious framework apart. And the other thing for me too was that, even within religion, I'd never been comfortable with the idea that I was less because of my gender. That was something that I always chafed at from the very beginning. And I think just like continuing on down that and being like, no, actually, like my function in life is bigger than to marry somebody and like get pregnant and start sneaking out babies. Like I can't. I know. They really do. So yeah, and then I got my first like really like big girl journalism job at Mother Jones magazine, and my first assignment for fact checking was a feature about abortion. So it was about what was going on in Texas with HB2, and I had just never seen it so up close and personal. I'd never really had conversations with people where it was like being denied an abortion or even just like having to jump through the hoops to get an abortion changed this person's life forever, changed their economic outlook, changed everything. And I never had to reckon with that in that way. So what I'm saying is I come from a lot of privilege, and then like it sort of got busted open like the further into the world that I got, and I'm really grateful for that.
One thing that struck me from what you shared, and just trying to think about the comparison to my history of upbringing, was that similarly, abortion was not really talked about, but for really different reasons. In my community, it was very regular and very matter of fact. It wasn't special or even really seen as that scary. It was just sort of a thing that happens sometimes, like some of my peers stayed pregnant and some of my peers didn't.
Mhm.
And that was really my experience until I got to college and started reading more feminist texts and really started to think about more Black feminist theory. But in my, in my youth, it was really not a big subject in my life, in my household, even in my church. It was not the thing that was sort of galvanizing folks either necessarily. It was just a thing.
Well, it's interesting that in both of those scenarios, like it was something that we just didn't talk about.
That's right.
So like we didn't talk about it from a place of stigma and y'all didn't talk about it. It sounds like just because it was part of life.
Correct.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, I think mine is a bit of a merging of the two, and like really reflective of this sort of hybrid experience that I had growing up, where my rootedness was in sort of an urban center in Newark, New Jersey, where my mom had me at 17. And an abortion wasn't even something that even crossed her mind, right? And my grandmother is a Jehovah's Witness. So you already know. My grandmother also had like 12 kids, child, right? And so just like it was matter of fact, like in your story, it's matter of fact that sometimes like when you get pregnant, you just don't have the child, you figure it out, right?
That's right.
Because that's what our people did. And then I remember my mom disclosing to me later that there were times where she had an unplanned or unwanted pregnancy and that she went to Planned Parenthood, right? And so it wasn't so much later, maybe when I was in middle school, right? And at this time I was in Southern Vermont, a rural small town in Southern Vermont, a working class town. And I remember accompanying friends to Planned Parenthood to support them through their abortions, right? And so for me, it felt like, similar to you, like you're not about to tell me anything, right? And I've had a strong personality my whole life, you know what I'm saying? And I've always had a gender politic and a race politic. And my mom instilled that into me from a very, very early age. And so for me, it did not make sense for anyone else to be making that decision for you. However, experientially, right? So we can say like, you should have autonomy over your body. No one else has the right to tell you what to do or to coerce you into whatever decisions. It wasn't until I was actually pregnant myself as a teenager at 19, and I have my partner saying, oh, like you shouldn't do X, Y, and Z, right? So it's a very different experience from supporting a friend and then myself going through it experientially. And so it's just interesting how those nuances can color that experience for people. But that's still my entry point, right? Like even the coercion that I experienced to carry that pregnancy to term, right? I have a beautiful 10-year-old now, but like thinking through like how that coercion happened and the intention was not to be coercive, right? And so all of these nuances exist, and partly they exist because of our failure to have these conversations about abortion, right? So that silence turns into something.
Failure to have conversations about abortion, about sex, about pregnancy, about our bodies. Like there are so many sort of blank spaces that we have had to, over generations, fill in the gaps and sort of stumble through to get to, whatever our lived experiences end up being. So I think part of what I'm really, it's hard to feel hopeful about a lot of things, but part of what I do feel like I'm more hopeful about is that as more journalists cover abortion stories, miscarriage stories, gender affirming care, as more of that becomes normalized in the public spaces, my hope is that that softens our ability to have these conversations in intimate spaces with one another, that folks feel like they can be open and vulnerable and ask questions that they might have otherwise thought were taboo or silly, because I think that that helps us be more human with each other.
Yeah, 100%. And covering abortion as part of all the rest of it and not this like separate thing that is weird and like out there on its own.
Right, which leads us to RJ, right?
It always comes back to our
Always comes back to RJ, we gotta bring it home every time. And that's the angle, right? That's the lens through which you are writing this text. And it's so evident in the sort of centering of narrative throughout the text, right? And so for those who are not familiar, the reproductive justice framework is rooted in Black feminist theorizing, and Black feminist epistemology that has 4 dimensions. The lived experience as a criterion of meaning, the ethic of care, the ethic of personal accountability, right? So these are sort of at the core of Black feminist theorizing and the knowledge validation process. And that knowledge being like what we live every day in our lives, right? And how we create meaning from that. And so I thought it was really beautiful and true to form how you incorporated storytelling. Can you talk a little bit about how that shows up for you as a journalist and your commitment to that and why you chose that path for this text?
I love that question. Thank you for that. Well, in case y'all haven't picked up on it, I'm Southern as hell. And storytelling is a really big part of Southern culture. So it's how we understand the world around us. It's how we understand our family. It's how we learn about safety and danger and how to exist in the world. So journalism always seemed really crazy to me that I could make money telling stories, and that was just a thing that I could do to live in a capitalist society. So there's that. And then, you know, I think kind of back to what y'all were saying about like how we connect with each other as humans, like it's always storytelling. It's always like being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes and like at least like on some level understand their experience and see their struggle and see the humanity in their story. And that felt so important to me with this book in particular. And I mean, in all of the journalism that I've done, narrative journalism is always, I mean, it's certainly the thing that excites me the most, but I find it's also what readers really connect with. Those are the stories that really land when someone reads something and they're like, oh my God, I never thought about it that way because my life has not taken any of those turns, or I have all of these different experiences. Like that's where you, I think, can make a really tangible difference. And I also, you know, like I say in the book, like I haven't had an abortion. So like my voice is not the one that needs to be out there about it. Like I wanted to talk to people who have had abortions and people who are helping others get abortion care and all of that. Like it just felt so necessary. I think especially in this moment, it just felt necessary to do that, period.
Yeah, I think that there's a way in which our movement has not always been careful with story. And I think there are organizations and individuals who have tried to approach story and storytelling not as a tool or thing to be leveraged to gain. I feel like that's a lot of people's experiences. You know, tell your story to this legislator so that we can XYZ. Tell your story to this reporter so that we can tell your story to this donor so that we, and so I think that there is something really powerful about story for story's sake, like that even if you only write it down for yourself to get it out of your body, even if you only tell one other person, there certainly is something really, just like any book, we're in a bookstore, like being invited into somebody's life for a moment is really powerful, but also like the preciousness of your story, that it is yours to share or not share as you feel safe, as you feel, especially something as, to me, intimate and sacred as reproductive choices. Right. So I guess my question with all that lead in, as a reporter, I'm curious about sort of your approach to inserting that care and intention when you're interviewing folks who might not have had a lot of safe places to tell their story, whether they're providers or folks who've had abortions.
Yeah, God, absolutely. So this is also a thing that I've thought about a lot over the course of my career, especially in my RJ reporting. But I think particularly with the book, because when you approach someone and you're like, I'm writing a book, and I'm asking you if you would consider telling me your story for a book, that feels really permanent to people. Understandably. So I wanted to really use extra care with that. So there are a few different things that I did. I always made sure to have a conversation with people, in particular who were sharing their abortion stories with me beforehand, off the record, just to be like, this is what my book is. This is what I think it's going to look like. Do you have questions? Do you have thoughts on how I should be changing the way that I'm approaching this? Are you comfortable with me using your name? Do you need anonymity? And, you know, also just trying to explain the journalistic process, because something journalists historically have not been good at has been approaching sources, particularly like normal people who aren't politicians, and being like, wait, like, this is what we do. This is what on the record is. This is what off the record is. I'm recording, and this is why I'm recording, you know, and that is so important. And it's even more important now as we enter this era where like criminalization is ramping up, like we have all of these risks. Reporters have to be so careful in this space and have to really think through the consequences of what we do and the power dynamics of what we do. So the other thing was that I never ever want to make anyone feel like they owe me their story, because they don't. Their story is theirs. This book is not mine. I mean, it's got my name on it, and that's kind of weird, but it belongs to the people who talk to me. It belongs to the people whose stories are in there. So I wanted to make sure it was an opt-in experience. So, you know, I didn't want to be like, and not that any of the clinics that I worked with would have let me do this, but I didn't want to be like busting up in clinics and being like, I'm a reporter, talk to me about your abortion. And it's like, these people are here for a medical procedure.
You would be surprised.
I know. But yeah, okay. We'll talk later. But yeah, so I basically what happened is I created a form, and I would sit in like a little back room in a clinic and just be like, look, you know, if you feel like it's appropriate, would you pass this on to your patients? And if they want to talk to me, I'll be back here. But otherwise, like, they can just come in and get their medical care and leave. Because most of them, that's what they want to do. Most of them don't want to talk to a reporter, and that's fine. So that was the other part of it. And then the last thing that I'll say about it is that I think because of the way that we've approached abortion stories, there are some people who feel like their abortion story doesn't matter because it doesn't have a certain amount of trauma to it,
Right.
or because it doesn't like fit some particular political narrative. And that was something that I also felt really, really strongly about with the book, where it was like, and I would hear that from patients too that wanted to talk to me, but then they'd be like, well, I don't know that what I have to say matters, because really I'm just here to get my abortion and then I'm gonna go live my life. And I'm like, no, like, maybe that's an abortion story. Like, that's it. And that's normal, and that's important to also talk about. So yeah, there was that element of it too, for what it's worth.
I appreciate you kind of talking us through the intention and thoughtfulness put into it beforehand, because there is that power dynamic, right? And the questions that are asked do have implications, and you know, and this, since you know the overturned row, I can't even imagine how many reporters you talk to. I've talked to so many damn reporters, my head busting. Right, and so just experiencing it and getting to a point where it's like I actually need to stop talking to reporters, you know, because of the lack of care and intention. And I think, you know, there is that part responsibility on us, right? We're gonna practice revolutionary criticism, y'all. There is that responsibility on us for how we have navigated that and how we have brought people into that, and to what end, right? And going back to some of the sort of values that we have that are very much centered on being responsive to community and accountable to community. That looks like taking extra care with the stories that we hold. Like we're story keepers, like that's a sacred responsibility, you know, if we're thinking about you know, even traditional practices, traditional African indigenous practices, like there's an immense responsibility with being a story keeper or a storyteller, right? And so you're not trying to replicate that like sort of extraction and this sort of selling of these stories, right? And so, and I think in the sort of society that we live in today, you know, people really encourage that, and you know, with social media, people want those like little quick, like sensationalized things, but I think that requires that extra level of care that you were describing and that you were identifying.
Yeah, I agree, and I too have talked to very, very, very many reporters with varying degrees of grace that they have brought into that process. Certainly there are some that approach it in the way that you've described, and then there are some who their time is more important than my time. Their deadlines are more important than my deadlines. And so it can be really challenging to want to continue to push the discourse, to want to be able to inform people about what's going on, but balance that with like, I literally have work to do to like do the thing you want me to tell you about. So I can't both talk about it and do it at the same time all the time.
Turns out.
But yeah, I mean, I think that we are in a very fascinating moment in that so many of the things that people are experiencing, the things that you describe in the book have been happening for such a long time, and that the attention has been focused in a very particular way because of the political moment that we find ourselves in. And so it's just interesting how the ways that the media and sort of the average person are thinking about these things in a way that we think about basically all day, every day. So it sometimes, I don't know, for me, it's fascinating that it's so high in the public discourse right now. I'm not surprised, but I'm also just like, there is an element of being surprised that these things were not on your radar before. These things that there were so many elements to the disparity, the inequity, like all of the ways that oppression has been ravaging our communities for such a long time, for so many people feels new. And so I think one of the things that I really appreciated about the way the book was shaped was really talking about, you know, over the course of time, how things have evolved, like talking about what was happening in the 60s, talking about what was happening during enslavement, talking about what was happening, you know, sort of over the course of history and what we can glean. So I guess I gotta put a question in there. I think, you know, I guess maybe curious about how you approach sort of like the historical like thread, because I know that kind of research, that kind of like it doesn't read like a historical text necessarily, but it does carry someone over the course of time. So yeah, I don't know if that was a really clear question, but that's the question.
Yeah, no, you're doing it. It probably helps that I'm a huge nerd. So I really enjoyed the research process, probably a little bit too much. The nice thing about being in journalism is you always kind of have that editor to pull you out of a research rabbit hole and be like, no, okay, but like, what's the point? Like, where are you going with this? And with the book, there's less of that. So there were a lot of rabbit holes, but I thoroughly enjoyed myself. I mean, it felt so important to go all the way back
Yeah.
and be like, abortion has been part of the human experience for as long as humans have been on this earth.
Mhm.
Like, from the very beginning, we have evidence that abortion has always been practiced.
Tell the truth.
And that disparities within like who gets abortion care and what that care looks like have lasted for as long as white supremacy has lasted. So like I wanted to make sure this book didn't land as like, oh, abortion, it's a new thing, you know, like I wanted to like sort of show like, okay, this has been ongoing, whether you've been paying attention or not, and like, you don't know what you don't know, like, I'm not trying to shame anybody for not knowing or like, you know, not knowing everything in the book, and it's the whole point of writing a book, but it would have been irresponsible, I think, to do it any other way, and like, it's certainly not a comprehensive history. I would love to write that book. It would take me like 10 years, I think. Partly because I can't stop myself in the research, but yeah.
And also the field of history is that rich, right?
Yeah,
Like,
it
it's
is.
that robust. When you look across time, when you look across geographic location, there is a robust history there that's often not discussed, that goes unknown. And so I also appreciate that element. And I'm just curious about the stories that you selected with each chapter, right? What's the story, since we're talking about storytelling, what is the story behind that selection process? Can you talk us through like your thought process for why each maybe not each chapter, but like why you selected them? What stood out to you maybe perhaps thematically about the chapters, or like, you know, any sort of insight to the thought process behind that selection? Because you could have taken this in a lot of directions, right? And it felt really intentional. And so I'm just curious about that.
I'm really glad it felt intentional. It was, some of it was kind of messy. But yeah, I mean, I kind of just started, at least with like pre-row stuff. I didn't initially go all the way back. I started out by, and this seems very stupid now, but for some reason it worked. I like tweeted asking for people who had pre-row abortion stories to get in touch. And that worked weirdly. So two of the people who got in touch with me, one of them had gotten her abortion through the Society for Humane Abortion and the list, though she didn't know that that's what it was. So I got to sort of marry my like research nerd with the investigative part of me and put that history back together, which was also really rewarding to be able to do for her to be able to be like, oh, I had no idea that like these are the women who helped me, and so that was a really beautiful thing to get to experience. And it was kind of similar with the woman who got help through the clergy consultation service. But I also, frankly, you know, when it's self-selection like that, and I'm a white girl tweeting, like, it's a lot of white women,
Right.
and I was very uneasy with that, because going into the book, I was like, I don't want this to be, white women are always another, no, white women are always trying to have these books about abortion, and like, I swear to God, like, it's just a tiny like slice of it, and it leaves out everyone else, and it's still so rooted in white supremacy, and I didn't want to do that. So it felt very important to really dig back into history, and to also, you know, talk to elders and talk to people who had wisdom and had history, and frankly are smarter about this stuff than I am, and could talk to me about it. So like, talking to Loretta Ross for me was huge. I mean, I remember being on the phone and just shaking, because I've read all her books, you know, like she's a giant to me.
She's literally a genius.
Yeah.
Literal genius. Certified.
And it's very intimidating also to talk to someone that be like, I'm just this like little redneck girl from middle of nowhere, Tennessee, and I'm talking to Lord Ross. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, it was like one of those things where I was just reporting and researching as much as I could, and what I got was what I got. And there's a lot that's missing from that. But yeah, that's kind of how it ended up, the way it ended up.
So when I was going through the book, the chapter that I was drawn to was burnout. Maybe that word is just a trigger for me, I'm not sure. But so one of the things that really struck me when I read that chapter was the depiction of patients' experiences in clinics. And I'm definitely not here to get defensive about clinics. I think it was, you know, there's a really wide range of ways that people have experienced care. So I think I was really struck by there was not any attempt to excuse, or I don't know, there was a very honest depiction of some of the ways that clinics cause harm. So just to be as transparent as possible. And so yeah, I don't, again, I've never done this before, so I'm trying to find the question in my statements. Like, I have lots of thoughts, but I don't have questions. I have lots of opinions, but no questions. So yeah, I was just curious about that, and just about the different ways that you experienced working with, talking to providers, whether they were physicians or frontline staff, independent clinics and Planned Parenthoods, for-profit clinics, nonprofit clinics, like what that experience of sort of interrogating the clinic environment and space was like in preparation for the book.
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that too. I wondered if we were going to talk about this chapter. I really struggled with this chapter. I really wrestled with it. And it's funny when I talk about it, it sounds so straightforward, but it's just not in the moment. So my ethos, I guess, has always been, you know, to stay true to the story that's being told. So like for me, that was representing these patients' experiences within the clinic. But it felt very uncomfortable to me because I know that anti-abortion folks will weaponize things, and I know like that clinics are up against really insane hardship. But it also felt important to me, A, like to stay true to the stories that were being told to me, but B, to show how there's this guise of, oh, you know, we're putting all these restrictions in place to keep people safe. It's like, no, you're actually making it harder for the clinic to do their job, and that's affecting patient care. And that's not okay. And it is a conversation that needs to happen within the reproductive justice movement and within clinics. But it's also, I just felt like it was so important to be like, this thing that they're saying in these legislative halls is wrong. It's just completely false. But I did, you know, like, I think it's hard when you, like, I as a person, and I am very straightforward about this in the book, like, I am unabashedly pro-abortion. Like, everyone deserves the right to abortion. That's something that I believe. That's my, like, moral, that's where I operate from, right? A byproduct of that is that, like, you hear, you know, the political talking points and the say this, but don't say it like that, but don't say it like that, but say it like that. But that's not the world that real people get to live in. So it felt really complicated to me to write that story. And I wanted to be very clear that, like, I'm not demonizing clinics. I'm not like coming for anybody. I'm trying to say, like, this is an impossible system, and also the structure of our healthcare system in the United States is fundamentally unequal.
Right.
So we also have to talk about
Right.
that.
Which is why RJ exists in the first place, right? And so it is ironic that like the origins of the term, the framework, the movement is to struggle against reproductive oppression, right? Many of us have heard the history of gynecology in the United States. We know that gynecology as a field is built off of Black women's bodies. And even those of us who operate and organize and, you know, work in this space even experience this reproductive harm, right? Because of how we're situated, because of who we are when we enter that space, right? And so there is this dynamic between a commitment to truth telling, right? Which is required by those of us who are committed to reproductive justice. And this desire to present this sort of like unified front all the time. And sometimes I find that that desire to like not paint the clinics, right? So I'm glad that you made, like it was tough, right? Like, but you made a decision to tell the truth. Sometimes the decision to not do that creates reverberations, like re-articulates that harm, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And so I think that's something that we tend to struggle with as a movement, and it's going to be something that we have to continue to struggle with because there is this this sort of mandate to be committed to truth telling, and this desire to present ourselves in a particular way, right? And so we have to weigh, right? Like weigh the consequences of choosing either path, and then what's in the best interest of the masses of people, because those are the people that we're committed to, right? And so I think, you know, how do we make those decisions? We come back to that, right? Like, is this in this interest? Or is there some like ego? Is there some, you know what I'm saying? Like a lack of self-awareness, you know, like all of those things, elements that, you know, we're all human in this, right? And we're all figuring it out. But as, you know, folks in it, people look to us, right? Like we're accountable to the masses of people, people look to us for guidance. So committing and recommitting to that truth telling is something that I think is really important, and I appreciate it. And I think I think it was the final chapter where we heard from some of our movement leader friends. And that was so cool to like see these names in the book. I don't know, like I love books. Like I got coffee with that, breakfast with them, like yeah, you know, we laughed together, we cried together, you know. So that was really, really cool. But like we were talking about this before we got started, like reading their voices on paper, right? And so I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the themes that I saw around like this conversation that we're having about abortion right now, right? And how like those of us who've been in it and have carried the reproductive justice framework with us. And so we're thinking about the intersections of economic justice, of racial justice, of environmental justice, of housing justice, right? When we think about the caller, the average caller in the ARC Southeast helpline, that's a Black person. Over 80% of the people that call our helpline are Black people, right? Which speaks to the economic crisis that people are in, right? People cannot afford to pay for their
Are you
care.
telling me that the economy and abortion are two separate issues?
It's all being.
Wowzers.
Who would have thought? Yeah, that's right. And so like, we hear the actual story, speaking of storytelling, you know, like we're saying, like, if I take money to my equipment, I can't pay my rent. That's real. But we in Atlanta right now, well, we're in Decatur, but you know, we in Atlanta right now with the highest income inequality in the country, rapid gentrification, people having to travel longer distances now because of this this 6-week ban, child, right? So creating additional barriers. We exist as organizations and we do the work that we do, and we're oriented in the framework that we're oriented in because of those gaps, right? Because of those existing gaps. And so to hear from the folks in our movement, and it's kind of the frustration, like where people are saying like, oh my God, the destruction of Roe, like, you know, the world is over, right? We don't have time to be playing with despair like that. Like, let's keep it 100. there's work to do, right? And every day we delay and we wallow in that despair. Every day that's time wasted towards like building this revolutionary future where people have access as they need it and without question and all of that extra stuff, right? And so why did you end with that chapter? What's the tea? Right, because we hear from Oriaku, we hear from Lori, which I really appreciated her bringing that Mississippi perspective to the table. That really gave me chills when I read that. Shout out to Mississippi Reproductive Freedom Fund, who was incredibly responsive to this Jackson water crisis, right? And so we see the intersection of environmental justice right there, right then. When you got brown water coming out the tap and people can't make, and you got a formula shortage on top of that, right? Yeah. And so you have all of these intersecting issues that are impacting the average people that we support on a day-to-day basis, right? And so, and you included those voices at the end of the text. And so I'm curious about that decision that you made there.
Yeah, so I wanted particularly to kind of step back and be like, you know, the Dobbs decision is devastating and it's awful and it's breaking a lot of people's brains. But the people, the RJ leaders in the South have been doing this for a long time. Like, y'all have been operating under post-road conditions for a long time. Right. And y'all really saw this coming and y'all prepared for this moment. And so it felt really important to be like, okay, like now I just kind of want them to talk. And I want y'all to hear from them about what those challenges have looked like and what they think the path forward is, because I'm a journalist, like I don't know, like y'all know, because you're talking to people and you're doing the work and you're in the community. You know, Lori's point in particular really got me, and I think she got a little annoyed with me because I kept like texting her being like, okay, are you sure like you're cool with this? And she was like, I am so cool with it, like just print it. It's
Period. I said what I said.
But basically, Lori was bringing a critique of, you know, that Planned Parenthood did a lot of fundraising off of the Dobbs decision. And before that, off of their original 15-week ban before it became a Supreme Court case, they don't provide abortions in the state of Mississippi. Like, they don't provide abortion care in Mississippi, full stop.
And happened in a very long time.
Right.
Yes. Right. They have one clinic in Hattiesburg. It provides basic contraception, and that's great and that's important. And like, no disrespect on that, but like, for someone like Lori, who is doing the full spectrum reproductive justice work, and she's seeing Planned Parenthood getting millions of dollars off of the problem that she's having to deal with every day, that's frustrating. Like, that's frustrating for me to look at, and I'm not living it. So, and I also think that a lot of people don't know that that's the situation. Like, they assume that if they give money to Planned Parenthood, that that's mutual aid going toward abortion care, and that's not what that is. So, yeah, maybe I'll just end this question with a call to like, invest in your local abortion funds, invest in ARC, invest in feminists. They're the ones who are doing the work. They're the ones who we should be looking to right now, because they know their shit.
I always approach conversations about Planned Parenthood with a lot of thoughtfulness, because you know, I don't want to completely disparage everything that they do. However, there are very well documented instances of harm, both at the affiliate level and at the federation level. And so it is something that we have to be willing to reckon with in real time. And particularly thinking about the level of like power. Like, Planned Parenthood is a corporation with like billions of dollars. And so it's really, you know, I cannot say that I cannot tell people exactly how to invest their money. I think that we should all be really thoughtful about like, what do we want our dollars to do?
Right.
Like, what do you want your dollars to make happen? And so being able to use that as an interrogation lens with any of your charitable giving, it's like, you know, Jaleesa and I were talking about this before we began, like there are a lot of ways that nonprofit industrial complex is something to wrestle with.
Yes.
But figuring out what you want your dollars to go and do on your behalf is like a great first question before you write the check. And there are a lot of organizations, some of which you have named in this book, some of them that we haven't, but that are doing absolutely incredible work with like gum and string, who have been like actively disinvested in.
Right.
And in this moment, you know, as we look at a bunch of maps that are painted a bunch of different colors, some of that is an indication of how people should value or invest in those places, and saying some of those places are a foregone conclusion, not worth our time.
Right.
And I feel sometimes it's situated in Atlanta, Georgia, the way that people decide in order to invest in the South, we'll invest in Atlanta because that's the safe place to do it. And I think about the way the dollars that came to Atlanta that should have gone to Jackson, that should have gone to Baton Rouge, that should have gone to Tuscaloosa. I think about it a lot, about the ways that the amount of progress, the things that Georgia has been able to take credit for, that are a reflection of long-term investment that has been denied in other places where people deserve more.
And have the least, right? It exists under the most precarity. So I think that's what stuck with me about Lori's her quote, right? Like we're not the right people, right?
Right.
You know, we could talk about respectability, and we could talk about proximity to power, right? And how organizations are structured and all of that too, right? Because then what's the responsibility if we're the ones receiving the bag? Right? Like what do we do then? Right? Like, and so I think there is that, and there is that disinvestment in rural work with rural people. And that is very deeply rooted in white supremacy and anti-Black racism, that believes in throwing people away, that believes in rural folks as disposable people, as not worthy of investing, as not worthy of canvassing, of organizing, of having conversations with, right? And then when we talk about working with these people, we talk about it from such a paternalistic place, like we're gonna come in, we already got our agenda set, and we're coming in to tell them the agenda, right? Instead of the other way around, right? Like we come in to learn, to listen, to hear, to be with, right? Talk about storytelling. And so it's like, we have to recommit to that work. And that was something that just like, you know, rose up in me as I was reading her statement about not being the right type of Black person. And what that means materially for people on the ground in places like Mississippi and rural Mississippi.
Yeah, absolutely. It's tough. It's tough. And there are so many big systems, like there's big, substantial, not incremental, not baby step, there's like big swing kinds of change that are necessary in order for us to get to the things that our folks actually need.
Right.
And so, to Jaleesa's point, I'm really grateful that Lori, and folks like Lori, and folks like some of the other people that you profiled, are able to like stand 10 toes down, in their truth, in their integrity, and talk about what they need and what they've been denied.
Yeah. Yeah, that was powerful.
Yeah, she is a force. Should we make the next question, Sarah?
Yeah.
I don't have not been paying attention one bit to time.
You know, me either, sorry.
You're right.
All night.
You're right on time, so I want to encourage folks, if you have a question, your signatures, we'd love to have you ask. Big saw.
So this is kind of for all three of you, and I know you sort of already touched on it, but how do you like day to day cope with the incredulity that comes with Roe being overturned and like the bleakness of the future in a lot of ways, especially coming out of this election? Like, how do you deal with that? All three of you, I guess.
I'll start and I'll try to be quick. So we keep providing abortions is the answer. We are providing them under significant constraints, but we are still providing them every day. And, well, not every day, but on the days that we do. And part of what I'm hopeful about, like I say this all the time when I'm on panels, it's like optimism and hope and a like sincere, deeply held belief in a different future is the only reason that I can keep doing this work. If I did not believe that different was possible, then I would do something else with my time. So I am really thinking about, like, I meditate on that future all the time. And I think about what are the things that I need to do today that take me closer to that. And, you know, the practice of like radical imagination, the practice of visioning is something that we don't get a lot of time and energy to do. White supremacy robs us of imagination, but being able to like see and feel and like experience, smell and touch all of the things that we want, that we desire, that we believe are possible is like the way to like guide my actions in the today. So that's my shortest answer I can give. I can talk for a long time about how like the clinic has adapted and our plans. We have all kinds of plans.
What types of plans?
But you know, the shortest answer is just like, you know, believing that, you know, if I take a nap this afternoon, then in 100 years there will be no police. Like being able to take that leap of saying like, if I call this person and have lunch with them, then in 100 years, healthcare will be free. Like, and believing that sincerely, that is true.
Feel that. And similarly, I think one of the things that keeps me is our work is material. Like, it's not no metaphysical like thing that we can't see, feel, touch. Like it's right there. It feels like a blessing to be able to connect people to care. So there's like the real like feel good from that, right? Like inject that into my veins every day. There is the belief in the next generation that is coming up that is so much more badass than we are, right? Like my 15-year-old sister and them, it's a wrap. I just want to let y'all know, like, I want the ops to know y'all are on notice. It's a wrap, right? They're reading, they're learning. She's in journalism right now. Yeah, it's real cute. And so like really seeing that and nurturing that. And then I think finally the thing, or the last two things for me is my approach to leadership is staying close to community. It looks like being there and my decisions, like the places that I choose to be, like here tonight in this intimate space here, I don't come out the house like that. It's intentional, right? Like I am the type of leader that wants to stay close to community, close to my working class roots, close to the lived experiences of the people that I'm related to right now on today that's dealing with all the issues that we're talking about, right? And then I got 2 kids, like I can't give up. they're watching me. And I'm raising revolutionaries, so that's an incredible responsibility. And so pouring into them and teaching them, right? Like my 10-year-old could talk you down about abortion access, but you're not allowed to. So that keeps me as well. And so we gotta find those moments, we gotta take them naps. I heard, we gotta take those naps. But I think recommitting to that and just seeing like liberation struggles, right? Like sometimes in the United States, we get real bogged down because we don't have those examples of when people have fought hard and won. But when we look to the international landscape, when we look to fighting off the Portuguese and Mozambique, when we look to the South African liberation struggle, when we look to Cuba, right? When we look to Haiti, that's where I get my inspiration from. We see where people have organized the masses and have regained their power and are continuing to struggle. And we have a responsibility to struggle alongside of them. Yeah.
So obviously I'm coming from a little bit of a different place as a journalist. But, for me, God, this is gonna sound really contrived and I promise, but it's not, but like, for me, it really is the privilege of my life to get to tell these stories and that I have people who will trust me with the intimacy of telling me their stories, whether that's abortion patients or providers or whoever it is, it's very holy to me. And if I let despair get in the way of doing that, then I lose myself. Like I don't know who I am anymore if that happens. So, like I do the things to take care of my mind, therapy and
Hell yeah.
Right.
One time for therapy.
Okay.
Shout out to my mother.
But yeah, damn, I'm lucky overall. I know there's some reporters in this room.
Oh, not
Do I call out?
Becca, I happen to know that you had a little bit of a deadline change on this book.
Oh my God.
And I, just hearing you talk about how intentional you were with putting this book together and how seriously you took the responsibility of telling these stories. I wanted to hear a little bit about how you navigated and accelerated the timeline with all of that that weightiness of those, keeping those stories true.
Kira's like, I'm gonna blow this image that y'all have of her as like organized and her shit together. We're just gonna blow it up. Yeah, so the Dobbs decision leaked.
Okay, I was curious about this too.
Yeah, that's why, so the copies that you have are not completed.
Okay.
The Dobbs decision leaked. The morning after, I get a call from my editor. And so before that, I had this lovely, 2.5 month revision period that I was about to go into. And I had these visions of printing out pages and sitting in a coffee shop with my little red pen and getting the prose just right and taking my time. And then I get this call and she's like, you had 2.5 months and now you have 2.5 weeks because we need to move this up before the midterms. I cried. I took a second and I had a little panic moment there. And then I hired a second fact checker to finish the book because fact checking is important because I'm human and I'm gonna get stuff wrong and we need to pay people. That's a whole other rant. But yeah, and then I just started reporting as much as I could about the moment and the moment that we were going into. By the end of it, I was eating Fruit Loops to stay awake. I went through several boxes of Fruit Loops, just like dry cereal. And that's how I stayed awake. I got in a very ugly altercation with the bachelorettes who were staying in my apartment building, decided to be loud on a night that I had a deadline. It was not great. It was not my finest work. But yeah, it was really intense. I'm so glad that the book is out and that it came out before the midterms and that we didn't wait until January. But I hope I never have to do that again, ever.
That's impressive, because my heart jumped a little bit when you said 2 weeks.
It was horrible.
So because we're a bookstore, one of the things that we usually ask is, are there any books that have been pivotal in y'all's work that you want to lift up that you think maybe might not be intuitive to folks or they may not know? It doesn't have to be like the book you read this year, it could be when you were a 5-year-old. But any book you want to just shout out, since we're in this space. So Lisa, you made all kind of faces.
The books in my head, child.
Do you need a minute or you want to?
Yeah, I gotta go.
Okay.
Well, I'll say, I mean, you already name checked the one that I always go to, which is Coming with Black Body. I mean, I think that for me, that was a very formative text, and, you know, hearing directly from Dr. Dorothy Roberts in multiple spaces. You know, her other books are also, you know, certainly important and worthy, you know, additions to the canon, but it's not a fun read, but it is an important read, and I think that it continues to be resonant.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a must read. If you have not read it, definitely
Go
read
read
it.
it.
Yeah,
They got
go
it right over
get
there.
it.
Quick
You have
find.
to.
Yeah, it's excellent. And she just came out with another book called Torn Apart that talks about family separation and, you know, abolition. So that's also a must read. I think for me, I'll say one that I was reading when the decision came down, was Joy James's Resisting State Violence. She wrote this book in the late 80s, early 90s. And she's talking about the malleability of the US Constitution, right? She's talking about the structure of the Supreme Court. She's talking about how they utilize language. She's speaking, and she talks about specifically about abortion, right? Basically forecasting what we're dealing with today, right? I wasn't even born yet when she started writing this book, right? 30 years old, like damn. And so to me, that is really telling. I didn't engage with her work, and I have a graduate degree in like gender studies, right? And she, like, why didn't I engage with her work in grad school? Because I went to a white women's college, that's why. Women's college. Yeah, that book is relevant to our political context today. And I think, you know, I'm always on my like soapbox about the importance of political education, but it really is critical to how we strategize against this type of repression. And so I often think about like, what would it look like if we really invested in political education and listen to folks who have been organizing around these issues for a really long time and have a lot of wisdom that we can glean. And then when we actually reflect on our own strategies, this is what I'm really flattering. Like when we really step into our revolutionary criticism of how we have moved and how we have contributed to how we've gotten here today, I think that is really core to how we move forward. But anything written by Joy James is a banger.
Yeah, definitely Killing the Black Body. That was such a crucial text for me so early on. Also, anything that Michelle Goodwin writes, I will read. Not only is she so brilliant about the law and race and inequality and reproductive autonomy, she's also such a beautiful writer. I really enjoy her books, and she's also just the sweetest human being. Like, she is so smart and so kind, and I just will like,
Yeah.
I'd do anything for her. She's amazing. To read her books.
That's a great place for us to wrap it up. So thank you all so much for being with us. For everybody who's watching virtually at home, thank you for being with us. We will say goodnight to you, and we just want to let you know you can buy your copy of No Choice. You can also buy the books that everybody mentioned via the links in the chat. And if there's folks who you wish were here tonight that are not here, just know we're going to put this video on our YouTube channel. You can share it. We would love for lots more folks to get to see this amazing conversation. So don't be shy, share it, spread the good word about No Choice. We want lots of folks to buy this important book. So thank y'all. We're gonna say goodnight to you, and thank you as well to our captioner, Kay Pettigrew. We appreciate you. Good night to y'all.